Ruth 4. A marriage with a happy ending. Imagine living through the following experience. You like a young man. You are emotionally attached to him. You see that you are compatible in your values and character. You want to get married. Then you realize that before the man you love can have full access to your life, there is another man whom you do not know, and he could become your husband for the rest of your life. And this is because God's law says so. Would that not stir rebellion against God within you? What is all this talk about God? What is all this talk about the Bible? I will do what I want. I will do what I like. No one controls my life, not even God. Or imagine experiencing the situation as a man. The love of your wife, the woman you deeply value, could belong to someone else. The woman you could love, the woman you would love as your wife, could become another man's life. Would you not feel like going up and beating up that man, enacting justice? This is exactly what happens in Ruth chapter 4. The love between Ruth and Boaz reaches its climax. Naomi's plan had succeeded. Naomi wanted Ruth to find rest in the home of a husband. And this is how chapter 3 begins. Ruth 3 verse 1. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, shall I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you?" At the end of the chapter, however, Naomi says in Ruth chapter 3 verse 18, "The man will not rest until he has settled the matter today." Ruth needed rest, but Boaz could no longer rest until the work of redemption was completed. However, the obstacle of the law stood before them. The law was clear. The closest relative had the first right of redemption. That relative was not Boaz. The central tension is this: God's law or human passion? Boaz's answer is God's law. The ancient philosophers often said there would always be a struggle between passion and reason. This is the tension of the story. In Samson's life, passion won. He lost his eyes. In David's life, passion won. He lost his family. But Boaz did not act this way. He said, in effect, even though I want to marry you, and even though you are dear to me, there is another man who comes before me. It is very clear that Boaz's love for God came before his love for Ruth. If the Lord required something through his law, Boaz would obey. Could you do that? Could you surrender the love of your life simply because God asks you to? On that day, Boaz accepted that risk. But the way he handled the situation showed extraordinary wisdom. He called the elders of the city to the gate. The city gate was the place where important decisions were made and covenants were confirmed, as we discussed previously. Boaz explained Naomi's situation to the man who had the first right of redemption. At first, the man agreed. He accepted the opportunity to redeem Naomi and her land. The situation seemed simple. If he purchased the land, Naomi was already old. She could have no more children. When she died, the property would remain his possession. His main interest was not necessarily to help Naomi. He saw an opportunity in redeeming the land and taking responsibility for Naomi. He saw the possession of material gain as a real possibility. But everything changed when Boaz explained that together with the land and the redemption of Naomi, the man would also have to take Ruth the Moabite as his wife. At that moment, the man stopped. He realized that his plan for material gain involved serious risk. If Ruth had a child, that land would belong to that child. The man might also have to divide some of his own estate to preserve the inheritance of the deceased. Therefore, he refused. For this man, everything was a transaction. Everything appeared as a material opportunity. When the opportunity for profit disappeared, so did he. So-called lovers are often tested by the same standard. If I cannot gain something from you, I do not want you. Boaz was not like that. He was willing to make the sacrifice. Therefore, he entered the covenant of redemption before those witnesses at the city gates. The first potential redeemer, removed his sandal, showing that he was giving up his legal right as claim over Naomi's land. Imagine that today, the notary and the legal document were represented by a sandal. A sandal. Immediately after the act of redemption, which also stated that Ruth would become Boaz's wife, the public blessing of the marriage was pronounced. Before the marriage was consummated through intimacy, the marriage received a public blessing. The public blessing came first. Only afterwards did the intimate life of the couple begin. In Ruth chapter 4, verse 10 through 13, it says, "Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, I have acquired as my wife, to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are my witnesses." Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel or Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he went to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. After their marriage, Ruth and Boaz had a child. His name was Obed. Obed became the grandfather of David. Naomi's neighbors congratulated her because she was now holding an heir in her arms. This also made an extraordinary statement. Ruth was better to Naomi than 7 sons. To say such a thing in that culture was almost unimaginable. It had to be inspired by God. The Jewish understanding was this: if you had children, you were blessed. If you had sons, you were especially favored by God. If you had 7 sons, you had reached what people consider the highest possible measure of divine blessing. What more could anyone desire than 7 sons? Yet the women of the village told Naomi, "Ruth is better to you than 7 sons." In other words, the blessing God gave Naomi through Ruth was greater than anything an Israelite could have imagined. The book has a happy ending. Naomi helps raise her grandson. Ruth and Boaz live out of love of their lives within God's plan. 3 generations meet within the plan of God. Now, there are several things to observe in chapter 4. Firstly, Boaz takes the initiative to redeem Naomi and her property. In the first 3 chapters, Ruth's effort stands out. Her character stands out. Her dedication stands out. But in the final chapter of the redemption, it is accomplished entirely by Boaz. According to the law, Naomi and Ruth would normally have been expected to appear at the meeting. However, when the redemption takes place, Boaz seems unwilling to expose their helplessness and vulnerability. He handles everything himself. This becomes an image of Jesus. He does not publicly expose our helplessness. He acts on our behalf. Secondly, one of the purposes of the book is fulfilled. Samuel seems to have been the human author of this book. Through this story, he demonstrates that David was the true king. Saul was Israel's first king, but Saul failed. Samuel then anointed David. Saul became jealous of David and began to hunt him down. Through the book of Ruth, Samuel shows the people of Israel that David was the true king. David descended from Judah. The prophecy stated that the true king would come from Judah. That king would ultimately be the Messiah. Thirdly, chapter 4 is a beautiful picture of Christ's redemption. Boaz redeems Naomi, an Israelite woman. He also redeems Ruth, a Gentile woman. In the same way, Christ redeems both Israel and the Gentiles. Boaz's redemption took place under the law and according to the law. In the same way, Christ helped and redeemed helpless humanity from under the law while fully satisfying the law. Naomi and Ruth were unable to redeem themselves. In the same way, sinful humanity is completely unable to redeem itself. One great question remains at the end of Ruth. How does their story influence us today, 3,000 years later? Keep your promises, even when they are costly. God uses people who do not abandon the commitments they have made. Boaz gave his word, and then he acted. He did not allow inconvenience, risk, or personal cost to destroy his commitment. A promise has little value until it becomes costly. Virtuous character attracts God's blessing. God's blessing is not attracted by position, title, or favorable social status. The mentality of the world values position far more than character. The world asks, what position does this person hold? How much influence does this person have? God asks, what kind of person is this? God blesses people of character. Ruth has no social position, has no wealth, had no national advantage. She was a poor Moabite widow, but she had character. Boaz also had character. God brought two people of noble character together in his plan of redemption. The marriage of believers begins with public blessings. Only afterwards does the intimate life of the couple begin. Biblical marriage does not begin secretly in the bedroom. It begins publicly before God and before witnesses. Covenant comes before intimacy. Commitment comes before consummation. Public responsibility comes before private privileges. Through Christ, a shameful past can have a glorious ending. Ruth came from Moab. Her people had a shameful beginning. Her past placed her outside Israel. She was a foreigner. She was a widow. She had no human reason to expect a glorious future. But grace changed her story. She entered the people of God. She married Boaz. She became the mother of Obed. She entered the family line of David. Ultimately, she entered the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Your past does not have to determine your ending. Even when your past contains shame, immorality, failure, brokenness, or loss, Christ can give your life a glorious ending. The book of Ruth begins with famine. It begins with death. It begins with graves. It begins with 3 widows. It begins with Naomi saying, I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. The book ends with bread. It ends with marriage. It ends with a child. It ends with redemption. It ends with the genealogy of a king. That is what the Redeemer does. He turns emptiness into fullness. He turns grief into joy, mourning into dancing. He turns a stranger into family. He turns the widow into a bride. He turns a shameful past into a glorious future. And he brings broken lives into his great plan of redemption.